The buzzing sound of the competition hall filled the air. Hundreds of students, each with their own grand ideas, filled the space with a mix of excitement and tension. Henry sat in the back of the room, his palms sweaty as he stared at the table where his team's prototype was supposed to be, until it wasn't. The small device that was meant to revolutionize energy efficiency sat in pieces, broken beyond repair. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? "What now?" whispered one of Henry's teammates, Maya, her voice trembling. Henry couldn't answer. All he could do was watch as the clock ticked down on their once-in-a-lifetime chance to win the international science competition. Their project, years of research, sleepless nights, and countless prototypes, had just collapsed. His heart pounded in his chest as he thought about the one person who had always inspired him to dream big. Elon Musk, the man who had once launched a car into space and made electric vehicles a global reality. The man who made the impossible seem not only possible but inevitable. But now, Henry couldn't help but wonder, what if the impossible wasn't meant for him? As the judges walked around the hall, glancing at each team's setup, Henry could feel the weight of disappointment on his shoulders. Their idea had been bold, too bold, maybe. They had tried to design a device that could harness solar energy in a way no one had done before, a machine that could power entire cities using only the sun's rays. Henry had read about Musk's SpaceX rockets, his electric cars, his ambitions to save humanity from climate disaster. He had thought if Musk could dream that big, why couldn't he? But now, looking at their failed prototype, Henry wasn't sure if his dream was just as far out of reach. Have you ever tried something that felt so close to success, only to watch it fall apart at the last moment? What did you do next? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Henry sat in silence as the other teams showcased their inventions, some with gleaming new tech, others with simple, clever designs. He couldn't shake the thought that maybe they weren't meant to make history. Maybe they were just ordinary kids chasing after a dream that was too big, too impossible. He leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. This was the moment when everything could change. Would he give up, or would he fight for his dream, just like the man he admired most? A few feet away, Maya's voice broke through his thoughts. "Henry, we can still fix this. We can find a way to make this work." But Henry didn't respond. He felt the weight of failure pressing down on him. They had put everything into this project, and now it was over. It felt like the end of his journey, before it had even begun. But then, he remembered something. A quote from Elon Musk that had always stuck with him: "Failure is just a step toward success." It was like a spark had ignited in Henry's chest. Musk had failed over and over again. He had lost countless rockets before landing one successfully. He had built Tesla from scratch, with people telling him it was impossible every step of the way. But he kept going, because he believed that the impossible was just an obstacle to be overcome. Henry stood up, feeling the weight lift off his shoulders. He wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. If Elon Musk could rise from failure, so could he. "I'm not giving up," Henry finally said, his voice steady. "We've still got time. We'll fix this." Maya looked at him, a spark of hope returning to her eyes. "You're right. Let's do this. We're not out of the game yet." With renewed determination, Henry and his team rushed to work. They didn't have much time left, but they had something more powerful: belief in the impossible. The clock was ticking, but for the first time in hours, Henry felt alive again. Henry had always been a dreamer. As a child, while other kids were content with video games and sports, Henry spent his time buried in books about science, space, and technology. His room was more like a small laboratory than a bedroom: tools, wires, and half-finished projects scattered across his desk. He didn't just admire Elon Musk. Henry studied him. From his groundbreaking work at SpaceX to his revolutionary advancements at Tesla, Musk represented everything Henry aspired to be. It wasn't just the inventions that fascinated Henry, it was Musk's mindset. His ability to tackle the seemingly impossible and turn it into reality inspired something deep inside Henry, a spark that would never go out. Henry wasn't born into wealth or privilege. He didn't have the fancy gadgets or the mentorship that many young geniuses took for granted. He grew up in a small town, in a modest home with his mother, Sarah, and his little sister, Lily. Sarah worked as a high school teacher, and while she didn't make a lot of money, she made sure Henry and Lily had everything they needed: love, guidance, and an understanding of the importance of education. From the very start, Sarah instilled in Henry the values of hard work and perseverance. But there was one thing she always told him that stayed with him. "You have the ability to change the world, Henry, but you'll need more than just brains. You'll need heart and grit." Sarah wasn't like other parents. She didn't hover over Henry with constant reminders or schedules. Instead, she allowed him to follow his passions. Every time Henry came home with a new idea, whether it was about creating a self-watering plant system or an app to connect people with renewable energy sources, Sarah never dismissed his dreams as too big. Instead, she'd always ask, "How are you going to make it happen? And what's your plan?" There was a level of trust between them, and Henry appreciated that more than she knew. While his classmates played sports or hung out at the mall, Henry stayed up late, sketching blueprints and reading about the great innovators of the past. He'd often fall asleep at his desk with a book in his lap, his head full of ideas that seemed to swirl in endless motion. But there were moments when Henry wondered if he was just a kid with big dreams, dreams that would never come to life. It was when Henry was in middle school that he first saw Musk speak in a TED Talk. The interview made him realize that maybe, just maybe, his dreams weren't as unrealistic as they seemed. Musk didn't just want to send rockets to space. He wanted to change the way humanity lived on Earth. He had the audacity to dream big, and his ambition was matched by an unparalleled work ethic. "Maybe I can do this," Henry whispered to himself as he watched the TED Talk for the third time that week. He could feel a fire ignite inside him. From that moment forward, Henry's life became a pursuit of making the impossible possible. As Henry entered high school, his passion for technology only grew. He took every available class on engineering, coding, and physics. He spent his free time at the library, devouring books about the latest in solar energy, space exploration, and sustainable technologies. He didn't have a mentor like Musk did, but he found inspiration in books, online tutorials, and in the stories of people who had changed the world against all odds. Still, there were days when doubt crept in. Those were the days when it felt like everyone around him was ahead. His classmates who had rich parents, fancy labs, and professional tutors. Sometimes Henry would overhear them talking about the latest high-tech gadgets their families had bought for them, or hear them talk about the connections they already had in the tech world. It was hard not to feel out of place. But there was something Henry knew for sure. He wasn't doing this to be like anyone else. He was doing it to change the world. And no one, no matter how rich or well-connected, could take that dream away from him. There was one person who always believed in him, and that person was Sarah. It was on a rainy Thursday afternoon that Henry had his breakthrough moment. He was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a jumble of wires and circuits, when his mother walked in and noticed his frustration. "Henry, you've been working on this for hours. Why don't you take a break?" she asked gently. But Henry shook his head. "I can't. I know I'm close, Mom. I can feel it. I just need a little more time." Sarah smiled and sat down next to him. "Sometimes, son, the key to success isn't about having the most resources or the most talent. It's about having the right mindset. And you, Henry, have something that most people don't. You're willing to keep going, no matter what." Henry looked up at her, his eyes tired but focused. That was the moment he realized that his mother's faith in him was more important than any tool or piece of equipment. Her belief gave him the strength to keep going, even when the path ahead seemed unclear. Later that year, Henry attended a local science fair. While most of the projects there were small-scale inventions like homemade volcanoes and simple robotics, Henry's project was different. He presented a model of a small solar-powered water purification system that could be used in third-world countries. It was a project he'd been working on for months, and although it wasn't perfect, it had potential. As he was explaining his project to the judges, one of them, a retired engineer named Dr. Williams, stopped him mid-sentence. "You know, Henry, this idea has a lot of promise. It's simple, but it could make a real difference," Dr. Williams said, scrutinizing the model. Henry was taken aback. Dr. Williams had worked at NASA before retiring, and now, here he was, showing interest in his project. "I'd love to help you develop this further," Dr. Williams continued. "If you're serious about this, I can be your mentor." Henry had always believed in the power of his dreams, but it wasn't until he started working with Dr. Williams that the true magnitude of his aspirations hit him. The path ahead was going to be much harder than he had ever imagined. It wasn't just about being smart or even talented. It was about persistence and sacrifice. And that's when he realized, more than ever before, how much it would cost him, not just in time, but in relationships. At home, things had always been straightforward. His mother, Sarah, was his unwavering rock. She encouraged him, cheered him on, and kept him grounded. But as Henry began to spend more time on his projects, the balance started to shift. The nights spent tinkering with his solar-powered water purifier and other inventions had grown longer. He was no longer the boy who came home and played with his sister, Lily. He was the teenager consumed with his dream, obsessed with making the impossible real. Sarah had always been there for Henry, but lately, she'd started to notice something unsettling. The late nights, the absent conversations at the dinner table, the frustration that seemed to seep into every moment Henry spent at home. She had always been supportive, but now she felt a growing distance between them. One evening, as Henry sat hunched over his desk, Sarah knocked softly on his door. "You've been working non-stop for weeks now, Henry," she said, stepping inside with a plate of food. "I think you need to take a break." Henry didn't look up. "I'm fine, Mom. Just need to finish this one last adjustment." Sarah placed the plate on the desk next to him. "You've said that for days. I just want to make sure you're not losing yourself in all of this. I've seen you so focused, but I also see the exhaustion in your eyes. And I see the distance growing between you and Lily. She misses you, Henry." Henry finally looked up, guilt washing over him. "I know, Mom, but this is important. You always told me that dreams come at a price." Sarah smiled softly, but her eyes were filled with concern. "Yes, dreams come at a price. But so do relationships. So does your health. So does everything else that matters." Despite Sarah's concerns, Henry's drive was unstoppable. His commitment to his projects became more than just a passion. It became an obsession. He knew that Elon Musk didn't sleep much in his early years, that Musk's mind never rested, always thinking about the next big idea. And Henry wanted to be like that. He wanted to push past the boundaries that others saw, to turn his dreams into something real. But as the months went on, the weight of that ambition started to manifest in ways Henry hadn't expected. Lily, his younger sister, had always been his biggest fan. She would stay up late with him, making sure he had everything he needed, and even helped him with research. But recently, she had stopped doing that. One evening, Henry walked into the kitchen to find Lily sitting at the table, staring at her phone. She barely looked up when he entered. "Hey, Lee, how's it going?" Henry asked, trying to sound casual. Lily didn't respond immediately. She tapped her phone screen absent-mindedly, clearly irritated. "I'm good," she muttered, her voice lacking its usual cheer. Henry sat down across from her, his stomach sinking. "You're mad at me, aren't you?" Lily let out a sigh, looking up at him with a mix of frustration and hurt. "It's not just about being mad, Henry. It's about feeling like I don't even matter anymore. You don't have time for anything other than your projects. Not for me. Not for Mom. You're always busy with your big ideas, but we're still here." Henry winced. The words hit him harder than he expected. He had been so wrapped up in his work, in his dreams of becoming the next great innovator, that he hadn't noticed how much his relationships were suffering. "I'm sorry, Lee. I didn't mean to shut you out," Henry said quietly, his voice full of regret. "You do matter. I don't want to lose you, or Mom, but sometimes it feels like this is the only way I can make any difference." Lily's eyes softened, but she still looked hurt. "I get that you want to do something big, but you're not going to change the world if you don't have anyone to share it with. I miss you, Henry." That night, as Henry lay in bed, he couldn't shake the guilt he felt. He thought about his mom's words, about how much Sarah had sacrificed for him, and about Lily, who was becoming more and more distant. Was it all worth it? Was pursuing his dreams worth losing the people who mattered most? The next day, Henry decided to take a step back. It wasn't going to be easy, but he knew that if he wanted to keep his relationships intact, he had to find balance. Dr. Williams had warned him that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, and that greatness often came with sacrifices. But Henry wasn't so sure that losing the people he loved was a price worth paying. When he arrived home that evening, he found Sarah sitting in the living room, reading a book. He walked over and sat next to her. "Mom," he started, his voice unsure. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I know I've been distant lately, and I'm sorry. I don't want to lose you or Lily in this." Sarah looked up from her book, her eyes warm. "Henry, I know you have big dreams, and I support you more than you can imagine. But you don't have to do it all alone. Your family is here for you. And sometimes, the most important thing is to make sure you don't lose yourself along the way." Henry nodded slowly, feeling a sense of relief. He knew what he had to do. He didn't have to choose between his dreams and his family. He just needed to find a way to balance both. After his conversation with Sarah and Lily, Henry felt a renewed sense of clarity. He'd spent so much time focusing on his individual dreams that he had forgotten the importance of community, of collaboration. Elon Musk wasn't a lone genius who built his empire in a vacuum. No, Musk had surrounded himself with brilliant minds, engineers, scientists, entrepreneurs, each of them contributing their skills, ideas, and expertise to turn his big ideas into reality. Henry realized that his dream of revolutionizing energy technology wasn't something he could achieve alone. He needed help, real help, and that meant finding people who shared his passion, who could bring different perspectives and strengths to the table. He had always been a solo operator, tinkering with his projects in isolation. But now, he saw that collaboration wasn't a weakness. It was the key to greatness. Henry had always been an introvert. He preferred working alone, in the quiet of his room, undisturbed by the chaos of social interaction. But as he thought about his project, he realized that he couldn't afford to be isolated anymore. He needed a team, a group of like-minded individuals who could help bring his vision to life. The first person he turned to was Maya, his friend from the science competition. They had worked together in the past, and although their project had failed, he knew she was one of the brightest minds he knew. If anyone could help him fix his solar-powered water purifier, it was her. He sent Maya a quick message, asking if she'd be willing to meet. The response was almost immediate. "Of course. I've been waiting for you to ask." Henry and Maya met at their usual spot, a small cafe on the corner of 7th and Main, where they'd brainstormed ideas before. Maya, with her sharp intellect and no-nonsense attitude, was always the type to get straight to the point. "So, what's the big idea?" she asked, sipping her iced coffee. Her eyes were bright, eager to hear what Henry had in mind. Henry smiled. "I want to fix the solar-powered water purifier. But this time, I want to take it a step further. I think we can make it smaller, more efficient, and cheaper to produce. If we get it right, it could change the way millions of people access clean water." Maya raised an eyebrow. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" Henry nodded. "I think we can do it. But I need you, Maya. I can't do this alone." Maya leaned back in her chair, considering. "Okay, I'm in. But this is going to take more than just the two of us. We'll need expertise in materials science and someone with a background in electrical engineering. Have you thought about that?" Henry's heart sank for a moment. He knew it was true, but the thought of finding and convincing others to join his cause was daunting. However, the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this was the only way forward. "Okay, then," he said, feeling a spark of excitement. "Let's get to work. We'll find the right people." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, research, and brainstorming sessions. Maya introduced Henry to Lucas, a talented electrical engineering student she knew from a robotics class. Lucas had a reputation for being a little bit of a genius with circuit boards, and Henry immediately saw the potential in him. At their first meeting, Henry and Maya laid out the vision for the solar-powered water purifier. Lucas, who had been skeptical at first, quickly became fascinated with the idea. "You're telling me this thing can be powered by solar energy and provide clean water for entire communities? That's incredible. I'm in." Next, they reached out to Sophia, a materials science major who specialized in sustainable building materials. Sophia had the knowledge they needed to make the purifier's components lightweight, durable, and cost-effective. She had also worked with solar technology in the past and was passionate about finding ways to reduce the environmental impact of everyday products. By the time the team had formed, Henry felt like he had found his people. Each member brought something crucial to the table: Maya's expertise in renewable energy, Lucas's mastery of electronics, Sophia's knowledge of materials, and Henry's vision. Together, they were unstoppable. Despite his excitement, Henry's transition from working alone to working in a team wasn't without its challenges. For the first time in years, he had to step back and allow others to take charge in certain areas. Maya took the lead on the project's logistics, setting up meetings, creating timelines, and ensuring everyone was on the same page. Lucas and Sophia dove into the technical aspects, working on the circuits and materials that would make their purifier a reality. Henry's biggest hurdle was learning to trust others. He was used to controlling every aspect of his projects, from the smallest detail to the final product. But with Maya, Lucas, and Sophia on board, he couldn't afford to micromanage. He had to allow them to make decisions and trust their expertise. At first, it was hard. There were moments when he disagreed with their approach, when he wanted to take things into his own hands. But as the team began to make progress, Henry realized something important. Their ideas were just as valuable as his own. They weren't just helping him achieve his dream, they were helping to shape it. One afternoon, after weeks of trial and error, the team gathered for a crucial test. They had managed to assemble a working prototype of the solar-powered water purifier, and it was time to see if it would actually function. The moment of truth had arrived. The team stood in Henry's garage, staring at the purifier as it hummed to life. Solar panels on the top of the device started to absorb sunlight, and soon, water began flowing through the filtration system. Henry's heart raced. Is it working?" Sophia asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. Henry could hardly believe his eyes. The purifier was working. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was a huge step forward. They had created something functional, something that could change lives. "We did it," Henry whispered, feeling a wave of pride wash over him. Lucas grinned, his eyes wide. "We're going to change the world." With the initial success of their solar-powered water purifier prototype, the team felt a rush of excitement. For the first time in months, Henry allowed himself to step back, breathe, and take in the moment. They had created something that could change the world. But as Henry quickly learned, the road to success was never as smooth as it seemed in the beginning. The initial breakthrough was only the start. There were still countless hurdles to face, some technical, some financial, and some personal. As the team gathered to discuss their next steps, it became clear that the hardest part of their journey had just begun. A week after the successful prototype test, they gathered in Henry's garage to refine their design. They were working late, fueled by coffee and determination. The purifier was functioning, but there were issues. Despite the solar panels working as expected, the filtration system was still inefficient. It took far too long to purify the water, and the output was lower than they had hoped. Lucas, who had taken the lead on the electronics, was the first to raise concerns. "I think the circuit isn't running at full capacity," he said, tapping on the screen of his tablet. "The sensors are giving incorrect readings, and that's causing delays in the water flow." Sophia was already scribbling on her notepad. "The materials we're using for the filter aren't durable enough either. The pressure of the water flow might be causing some of them to break down prematurely." Henry's stomach dropped. They were so close, yet so far away. All the excitement of the previous week felt like it was slipping away in an instant. He had assumed they were in the clear, but now it seemed like their project wasn't anywhere near ready for the real world. "We'll fix it," Maya said, as if reading Henry's thoughts. She looked around at the team. "We're not giving up. This is just the first obstacle. Let's figure it out." Henry nodded, trying to push aside his frustration. This was just part of the process. Greatness didn't come easily. And this purifier wasn't going to change the world if they didn't push through the challenges. As the days dragged on, the team hit a wall. They spent hours trying to figure out the issues with the filter material and the solar panel integration, but progress was slow. Henry couldn't help but feel a wave of doubt creeping in. He had led the team into this with high hopes, but now they were stuck. He could feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. It was during one of these frustrating late-night sessions that he remembered something that Dr. Williams had told him early on. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Sometimes, the best solution comes from outside your circle. Henry decided it was time to reach out. He called Dr. Williams, who had offered to mentor him when they first met at the science fair. The retired NASA engineer had vast experience working on projects that seemed impossible, and Henry knew that his expertise could make all the difference. Dr. Williams, Henry said, trying to sound confident, I need your help. We've hit a roadblock with the solar-powered water purifier. There are some technical issues we can't solve. Would you be willing to take a look? Dr. Williams's voice on the other end of the line was calm, reassuring. Of course, Henry. I'm happy to help. I remember how hard it was to find solutions when I was starting out. Let's schedule a time to meet. The next day, Henry and the team met with Dr. Williams at his workshop. The place was a cluttered, chaotic lab filled with mechanical parts, tools, and half-finished projects. It looked like something out of a sci-fi movie, and Henry felt a rush of excitement as they walked in. Dr. Williams greeted them with a warm smile. So, tell me what you've got, he said, gesturing to the prototype. Henry explained the issues they had been facing, from the malfunctioning circuits to the inefficiencies in the filtration system. Dr. Williams listened patiently, nodding along, before he picked up the purifier and began inspecting it closely. Well, Dr. Williams said after a long pause, I can see a few things right away. The issue with the sensors is the power supply. You're trying to push too much voltage through a small circuit, which is causing the readings to fluctuate. He handed the prototype to Lucas, who took it eagerly. You'll need to install a voltage regulator here and change the configuration of the wiring. As for the filtration system, you're right about the materials. They're not durable enough for long-term use, but we can solve that by integrating a new composite material I've been working on. It's lighter and more efficient. Henry's eyes widened. This was it, the breakthrough they needed. Dr. Williams went on to explain the steps the team would need to take in order to make those changes. It wasn't going to be easy, but at least now they had a clear path forward. As the meeting wrapped up, Dr. Williams offered one final piece of advice. The key to solving big problems is breaking them down into smaller, manageable pieces. Don't let the mountain overwhelm you. Just focus on the next step. You've got a great team here, Henry. Stay focused, and you'll get there. Back at Henry's garage, the team went to work with renewed energy. With Dr. Williams's advice in hand, they began to fix the issues one by one. Lucas worked on recalibrating the circuit board, while Sophia began sourcing the new composite materials. Maya helped coordinate the changes and kept the team on track. As the weeks went by, the purifier began to take shape. The issues that had seemed insurmountable at first were slowly being solved. The sensor errors disappeared. The filtration system worked faster and more efficiently. They even improved the overall design, making it more compact and user-friendly. For the first time, Henry felt like they were truly making progress. And while he still had moments of doubt, the support of his team and the guidance of Dr. Williams made all the difference. A month later, after what felt like an eternity of adjustments, the team was ready for the final test. The moment they'd all been waiting for. The moment that would tell them whether all their hard work had been worth it. Henry stood in front of the finished prototype, his hands trembling slightly. He was nervous, but he knew this was the culmination of everything they had worked for. The solar panels gleamed in the sunlight, and the purifier hummed quietly, ready to go. We're good to go, Maya said, giving Henry a thumbs up. Let's do this, Lucas added, his voice full of determination. With Sophia's help, they connected the purifier to a small tank of contaminated water. The system powered up, and water began to flow through the filtration system. The minutes dragged on, but soon, the water began to clear. It was working. The purifier was finally doing what it was designed to do. It was purifying water, using only solar energy. The project that had once seemed impossible had finally come to life. We did it, Henry whispered, feeling an overwhelming sense of pride. The team cheered, their hard work finally paying off. Henry knew that this was just the beginning. They had more work ahead of them, testing, refining, and eventually scaling up the project. But for now, they had achieved something incredible. The solar-powered water purifier had passed its first major test, But the reality of turning their prototype into a fully fledged product was beginning to settle in. The excitement of success was still fresh, but Henry and his team knew that the hardest part was yet to come. The next step was to find the resources they needed to bring their creation to the world. And for that, they needed money, capital. Funding was the key to scaling up their project, improving the design, and bringing it to market. Without it, all their hard work and passion would amount to little more than a great idea in a garage. Henry had never been comfortable with the concept of pitching his ideas to others. He preferred to build things on his own, to solve problems quietly, away from the spotlight. But now, he had no choice. If they were going to make a difference, he would need to step up and sell their vision, convince others to believe in the potential of their solar-powered water purifier. Henry's first attempt at securing funding came through the local entrepreneurial network. He and Maya attended a pitch event for startups looking for investors. Henry had been nervous about the event, but Maya had insisted they go. "You won't know if you don't try," she'd said. The event was held in a sleek, modern conference room, filled with aspiring entrepreneurs and wealthy investors who looked like they could finance 100 projects without blinking an eye. Henry felt completely out of his element. He wasn't dressed in a fancy suit like the other pitch presenters. His hands were still slightly stained from the prototype assembly, and his shirt was rumpled. But despite his nerves, he had to go through with it. The pitch process was brutal. Each entrepreneur had 5 minutes to present their idea to the investors, 5 minutes to sell their vision, explain their product, and convince them to take a risk. Henry's heart pounded as he stood in front of the investors, facing the microphone. Maya, who had taken on the role of managing the pitch, stood by his side. She gave him a nod of reassurance, but Henry felt exposed, vulnerable. He felt like everyone in the room was scrutinizing him, judging whether or not his idea was worth investing in. "Good afternoon, everyone," Henry began, his voice shaky. "My name is Henry Davis, and my team and I have developed a solar-powered water purifier. It's designed to address the global water crisis by providing clean, sustainable water to communities without access to reliable water sources." He paused for a moment, trying to steady his breathing. What sets our purifier apart is its efficiency. Unlike traditional solutions, which are costly and require complex infrastructure, our device can be manufactured with minimal resources. It's lightweight, portable, and completely solar-powered. We believe it could have a profound impact on people's lives around the world. Henry launched into the technical details of the prototype, how it was designed, how it worked, and how they had already made significant progress in solving the filtration issues. He was trying to paint a picture of what the future could look like if the investors took a chance on them. He looked around at the investors. Some were nodding, others scribbling notes. But Henry couldn't read their expressions. Was this enough? Was he even making sense? Finally, Maya stepped forward and finished the pitch. "We're seeking $250,000 to finalize the design, conduct field testing, and take this project to market. We have a prototype that works. We have a team of brilliant minds. What we need now is your support to scale it and make it available to the millions of people who need it most." There was a long silence. Henry's pulse raced. The investors exchanged glances, then began to ask questions. Too many questions. "How much does it cost to manufacture this purifier?" one investor asked. "Do you have any proof that it will work in different climates and environments?" another questioned. And then, the most difficult question of all, why should we invest in this when so many other water purification technologies are already out there? What makes your solution stand out? Henry's mind raced. This was the hardest part, selling the dream. He had to make them see that their purifier wasn't just another water filter. It was a game changer. He took a deep breath. "The difference is that our purifier doesn't require an expensive infrastructure to work. It's not a luxury item. It's for people in rural communities, places that lack reliable access to water. We're not just trying to sell a product. We're trying to provide a sustainable solution to a global problem. Our technology is scalable, and we can make it affordable for people who need it most." The room went quiet again. Henry felt the weight of their gaze on him, and he wondered if he had convinced them at all. Finally, the investors began to ask more technical questions, digging into the specifics of the design. They wanted to know about production costs, potential competitors, and market size. At the end of the pitch, They told Henry they'd need more time to think it over. It was excruciating. Henry, Maya, Lucas, and Sophia spent the next few days anxiously waiting for the investors to respond. They sent follow-up emails, hoping to keep their project on the radar. But as the days turned into weeks, the silence was unbearable. It was as though their dream was hanging by a thread. Maya kept the team motivated, reminding them that rejection was part of the process. "You don't get a yes every time," she would say, "but each no gets you one step closer to a yes." Henry wasn't so sure. He hated the feeling of waiting, of not knowing what was going to happen. It was like being in limbo. Was their idea really worth it? Would they ever find someone who believed in it the way they did? But then, just as they were starting to lose hope, an email came through. It was from one of the investors they had pitched to at the event. The subject line read, Solar-powered water purifier proposal. Let's talk. Henry's heart skipped a beat as he opened the message. The investor was interested in discussing the project further. They were asking for a more detailed business plan, including market projections, a breakdown of manufacturing costs, and plans for future product development. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a foot in the door. The next few weeks were spent refining their pitch. They worked tirelessly on the business plan, ensuring that every detail was accounted for. Maya, Lucas, and Sophia dove into market research, and Henry worked on the financial projections. They were determined not to let this opportunity slip away. Eventually, they set up a second meeting with the investor. This time, they were ready. And this time, they succeeded. The investor agreed to fund their project, offering them $250,000 in seed capital to take their prototype to the next stage of development. It was the break they had been waiting for. As they celebrated the news, Henry felt a weight lift off his shoulders. They had made it. They had secured the funding to continue their work and scale up the project. But Henry knew this was just the beginning. Securing funding was just the first hurdle. Now that they had the money to continue, Henry and his team were diving headfirst into the world of business, a place that was filled with complexities they had never anticipated. The technical side of their project was challenging enough, but now they were facing a whole new set of problems: marketing, production, logistics, and competition. The excitement of the previous weeks still lingered, but it was quickly replaced by the weight of responsibility. The $250,000 investment had opened doors for them, but it also came with expectations. Expectations they had no experience handling. With the funding in hand, the team knew they had to focus on perfecting their prototype before they could even think about mass production. The first order of business was to conduct rigorous testing in real-world conditions. They needed to know how their solar-powered water purifier would perform under extreme conditions: hot deserts, humid jungles, and icy mountains. Maya, who had taken on the role of project manager, worked with Lucas and Sophia to coordinate the testing. They sourced water samples from different locations and began testing the purifier under various conditions, including dirtier water, faster flow rates, and different temperatures. For Henry, this was the first time he had seen their invention pushed to the limit. It was exciting and terrifying at the same time. The purifier had already worked in controlled environments, but now, in the wild, there were far more variables. Would it break down? Would the solar panels be strong enough to handle consistent use in places with minimal sunlight? Sophia traveled to a rural town in Arizona to test it in a desert environment, while Lucas went to a village in South America to assess the purifier's effectiveness in high humidity. Henry stayed behind to monitor the tests remotely, but even from a distance, he could feel the weight of it all. If this product didn't work under these conditions, their dream could collapse. But when the reports came back, Henry couldn't contain his relief. The purifier worked. In fact, it performed even better than they had expected. The filtration system remained intact, the solar panels were durable enough to withstand direct sunlight for hours, and the water was purified in record time. For the first time in months, Henry allowed himself to smile. This was real. They were really on the cusp of something groundbreaking. The product was coming together, but scaling it up was a whole other ball game. The investor who had agreed to fund their project wanted results, and fast. They needed to be able to deliver a marketable product, and that meant finding a reliable manufacturer and creating a robust supply chain. Henry and the team knew this wasn't going to be easy. They had no experience working with manufacturers or dealing with large-scale production. It was a whole new world of contracts, negotiations, and logistics that they were completely unprepared for. They started by contacting local manufacturers to get quotes on how much it would cost to produce their purifier in bulk. The numbers were overwhelming. The cost of production was higher than they had anticipated, and the timeline for getting the units ready was longer than they had hoped. Maya took charge of the negotiations, tirelessly working to get the best deals with suppliers. She went through hundreds of emails, attended virtual meetings, and even flew to several factories in China to visit their operations in person. At first, it felt like every door was closing. Some factories quoted prices that were too high, while others didn't have the necessary equipment to produce the purifier at the required scale. Henry and his team were running out of time, and the pressure was mounting. Their investor was beginning to ask for regular updates, and Henry knew they couldn't afford any more setbacks. But then, one of the factories came through with a promising offer. It was a company with years of experience in producing solar-powered devices and a track record of delivering quality products on time. After several rounds of negotiation, they were able to come to an agreement on pricing and production timelines. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best deal they could get. While Henry's team was working hard to perfect their product, the market was becoming increasingly crowded. More and more companies were beginning to look into solar-powered water purification, and some of them had much larger budgets and established reputations. Henry knew they weren't the only ones trying to solve the water crisis. One afternoon, while scrolling through his news feed, Henry came across an article about a new competitor. A multi-million-dollar company had just launched a similar product, one that claimed to purify water 5 times faster than anything currently available. Henry's stomach sank. Could they compete with a company that had millions to spend on marketing and development? Maya, ever the optimist, refused to let the news derail their plans. "We've got something they don't have, Hart," she said, looking at Henry with conviction. "We're not just trying to make money. We're trying to make a difference. Our purifier is different. It's sustainable, affordable, and scalable. They may have the resources, but we have the passion." Henry nodded, although a part of him couldn't shake the worry. How could they possibly stand out in a market that was becoming increasingly competitive? The team realized they needed to focus on what made them unique. They weren't just another product. They were a solution to a global problem. Their purifier was affordable, easy to use, and could be deployed in areas where larger companies couldn't reach. They also started refining their marketing strategy. They created a compelling narrative about the purifier's impact, focusing not just on the technology, but on the communities it could help. They decided to launch a crowdfunding campaign to generate interest and gain early supporters, people who were passionate about the cause, not just the product. With the production in full swing, Henry and his team decided to go public. They launched a crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter, where they told their story. The video showcased their journey from idea to prototype, focusing on the personal experiences of the team and the impact their invention could have on the world. Maya worked with a professional video editor to make the campaign video as polished as possible. Lucas created detailed infographics showing how the technology worked, and Sophia reached out to influencers and environmental activists to spread the word. They used social media to generate buzz and get people excited. At first, the results were slow. The donations trickled in, and Henry began to worry. Were they doing enough to market the product? Were they reaching the right audience? But then, as the days passed, the campaign began to gain momentum. People started sharing the video. Influencers began posting about it. Small donations snowballed into larger ones, and soon they had raised more than $50,000 in just a few weeks. By the end of the campaign, they had surpassed their goal, and then some. They raised over $100,000 from people around the world who believed in their vision. It was the breakthrough they needed. The excitement of their crowdfunding success quickly turned into an overwhelming realization. They were no longer a small team working out of a garage. They were on the verge of something much bigger, and with that came a whole new set of challenges. Their solar-powered water purifier was not just a product anymore. It was becoming a business. The stakes were higher, and the pressure was mounting. The road ahead would require them to navigate retail partnerships, logistics, international distribution, and, most importantly, keeping their mission intact. As the team prepared to scale their operation, Henry had to confront a sobering truth. They were no longer just engineers and dreamers. They were entrepreneurs. And the business world was just as tough as the technical challenges they had faced. One of the first major steps in scaling was getting their purifier into retail stores. While online sales had been successful, the team knew that to reach the masses, they would need a presence in brick-and-mortar stores. This meant negotiating with big retailers, something that made Henry more nervous than anything else. Maya took the lead on this one. She knew how to handle people and had an eye for what big retailers wanted: guaranteed sales, strong margins, and a compelling story behind the product. She spent hours researching potential partners and cold-calling retail managers. It was a tedious process, but after several weeks of meetings, they finally landed a deal with one of the largest outdoor equipment retailers in the country. They would sell their purifier in both online and physical stores. The deal was a breakthrough. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Retailers didn't just want the product, they wanted proof it would sell. They required detailed sales projections, information about the target market, and a clear marketing strategy. Henry was grateful that Maya was handling the heavy lifting, but he also couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that they were diving deeper into the business world with every passing day. The product was his focus, but now he had to learn how to keep up with the business side of things. As they ramped up production, the next big hurdle was managing the logistics of manufacturing. The factory in China had been reliable so far, but scaling production meant higher demand for raw materials and more oversight on quality control. Henry realized that manufacturing a product at scale wasn't as simple as sending an order to a supplier. It required constant communication and management. Maya, Lucas, and Sophia had each taken on specific aspects of the logistics. Maya worked on coordinating shipping and international sales, while Lucas handled supply chain management, making sure the necessary parts were in stock and manufacturing timelines were met. Sophia worked closely with the factory to monitor quality control, ensuring that the purifier was built to the high standards they had promised to their customers. There was one particular setback that nearly derailed everything. A delay at the factory meant that an entire batch of purifiers was shipped late. The timing couldn't have been worse. It was right before a major launch event that would have brought them significant attention from both media and potential buyers. Henry and the team were faced with the difficult task of managing expectations. They had promised their backers, retailers, and early customers that they would deliver by a specific date. But now, they were staring at a shipping delay that could tarnish their reputation. "We need to make sure everyone knows what's going on," Meyer insisted when Henry expressed his concerns. "Let's be transparent. Tell them the truth, but also show them how we're fixing it." They sent out emails to their backers and customers explaining the situation, offering refunds or early access to future products. It wasn't ideal, but it bought them some goodwill. With the success of the Kickstarter campaign and retail partnerships in place, the next logical step was international expansion. Henry and his team knew that clean water was a global issue, and while their initial focus was on markets like the US and Canada, there were other regions that needed their product even more: Africa, India, and Southeast Asia, where the water crisis was even more pronounced. Henry had spent sleepless nights thinking about how to make the product affordable and accessible for people in these regions. While Western customers could afford to pay a premium for the purifier, the people who needed it the most often couldn't. Henry knew this was a critical challenge. If they were to truly change the world, they had to find a way to get the purifier into the hands of people who didn't have the money to buy it at a high cost. They explored options like subsidizing costs through donations or working with NGOs to distribute units in underserved regions. They also considered alternative models like offering the product in local stores with payment plans or microloans. But the biggest breakthrough came when they received an unexpected email from a major international aid organization that had been following their progress. They wanted to partner with Henry's team to distribute the purifiers in rural communities in Africa. This partnership would provide them with a massive distribution network, which would help them reach even more people in need. It was a moment of validation for Henry. They weren't just creating a product, they were making a real difference. However, international expansion came with its own set of challenges. They had to navigate complex customs regulations, import taxes, and new manufacturing partnerships to meet the demand. As the team worked tirelessly to meet these challenges, the scale of what they were trying to do began to hit home. They were no longer just a startup, they were a global company, and they had a responsibility to millions of people. With each new success, There were more temptations to cut corners or compromise their values. The pressure from investors to increase profits was growing, and the business world had a way of prioritizing revenue over mission. Henry found himself at a crossroads. Could they stay true to their vision while growing rapidly? Could they make a profit while still ensuring their product was accessible and affordable for the people who needed it most? One evening, after a long day of meetings and conference calls, Henry sat alone in the office, staring at the map of the world pinned to the wall. It showed countries where their product had been sold and where it was still needed. He felt a sense of awe at how far they had come, but he also felt a growing sense of responsibility. They had to find a way to balance their social mission with the pressures of running a business. Maya walked in and sat down next to him. "How's it going?" she asked, sensing his unease. Henry sighed. "I keep thinking about how we're growing so fast, but we're doing it at the cost of our mission. I don't want to lose sight of why we started this." Maya placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We won't. As long as we stay focused on our mission, we'll find a way. We're creating something that matters, something that will last." Henry nodded, the weight of the world still on his shoulders, but for the first time in a while, he felt the spark of hope again. They could make it work. They just had to keep pushing forward, no matter how big the challenges grew. As Henry sat at his desk, staring out the window, the weight of what they were trying to accomplish felt heavier than ever. The solar-powered water purifier was no longer just a product. It was a symbol of their vision for a better world. But with the rapid expansion of their company, Henry and his team were now faced with some difficult ethical decisions that would test their core beliefs. The partnership with the International Aid Organization had been a breakthrough, and the expansion into Africa, Southeast Asia, and other underserved regions was exciting. But it also meant they were stepping into a complex world of international trade, government regulations, and corporate interests that often didn't align with their mission. One of the first ethical dilemmas came when they were approached by a large multinational corporation. The company, known for its vast influence in the energy and water sectors, offered to help finance their global expansion. They promised access to their distribution networks, which could get the purifier into remote villages in Africa and South Asia within months. On paper, it was a dream deal. The money would allow them to reach millions of people, and the backing of a major corporation would guarantee credibility and stability for their brand. The deal was lucrative, and the financial security it promised could solve many of the logistical challenges they were facing. But there was a catch. The corporation had its own agenda. They wanted Henry and his team to compromise on certain aspects of the product, namely, the affordability and sustainability. The company suggested that they increase the price of the purifier to make it more profitable and reduce the quality of the materials to lower production costs. It was a deal that could make them rich, but it would compromise everything they had built. Henry was torn. The idea of expanding faster and having the resources to reach even more people was tempting, but at what cost? The team gathered for an emergency meeting. Maya, Lucas, and Sophia sat around the conference table, and Henry could see the same uncertainty reflected in their eyes. "I don't know," Maya said, breaking the silence. "The money would make things so much easier. We could expand faster, solve some of our current issues. But if we do this, we're no longer the company we set out to be. We'll become just another product on a shelf, controlled by corporate interests." Lucas nodded in agreement. "I think we need to ask ourselves, why are we doing this? If we go down this path, we'll be choosing profit over purpose. We can't sacrifice the core of what we stand for." Sophia, who had been quiet up until that point, finally spoke. "But what if this is our only chance to reach the people who need it the most? Think about the people in remote villages who can't afford our product now. If we partner with them, we could make it more affordable and get it to millions who need it." The discussion was heated. Everyone was passionate about the future of the company, but they all saw things from different angles. After hours of debate, Henry stood up. He had been quiet for much of the conversation, but he knew the decision was ultimately his. "We can't compromise on the mission," Henry said, his voice firm. "If we give in now, we lose everything. We've worked too hard to build something that truly makes a difference. I know it's going to be harder, but we'll find another way. We'll stay true to our vision." The room fell silent as the team absorbed Henry's words. It wasn't an easy choice, and the road ahead would be harder without the corporate backing. but they all knew in their hearts that staying true to their mission was the only path forward. After rejecting the partnership with the multinational corporation, the team turned their attention to other ways to scale their impact without sacrificing their values. Henry and his team were driven by the belief that the purifier wasn't just a product. It was a solution to a global crisis. They weren't going to let corporate greed stand in their way. One of the ideas that came up during their brainstorming session was partnering with local NGOs in the regions where the water crisis was most severe. These organizations had established networks and deep community ties, and they could distribute the purifiers at a much lower cost than they could through traditional retail channels. But working with NGOs also had its challenges. Some of them had limited resources, and their focus was on humanitarian aid, not on business partnerships. The team would have to find a way to create a model that worked for both sides, something that was financially sustainable but still kept the product affordable for those in need. Maya took the lead in reaching out to various NGOs and international organizations. After several months of negotiations, they found a willing partner in a large global aid group that focused on providing clean water to rural and impoverished communities. The group had the infrastructure in place to distribute clean water solutions, but they didn't have a viable, affordable product like Henry's team's purifier. This partnership was different. Rather than focusing on profits, the goal was to get the product into as many hands as possible. The plan was to subsidize the cost of each unit for the most impoverished regions, while still maintaining a profitable model for middle-income communities. Henry and his team worked hard to figure out how to make the cost structure work, and after months of back and forth with local governments, they found a middle ground that allowed them to meet their goals. The key to success in this model was finding a way to balance innovation with collaboration. They worked with local communities to distribute the purifiers directly, bypassing expensive logistics channels and middlemen. By using local labor forces to assemble the purifiers in-country, they could reduce costs and also provide jobs in the regions they were serving. In the end, the decision not to go with the corporate deal was the right one. The new partnerships were not only more aligned with their values, but they also led to a significant growth in their impact. Henry's team was able to deliver their product to the people who needed it the most, without sacrificing quality or purpose. The decision to stay true to their mission wasn't easy, but it felt right. With the new partnerships in place and the purifier making its way into more communities than ever before, Henry had a renewed sense of purpose. One day, he received a message from an old friend, an environmental journalist who had written about their product when it first launched. The message read, "Henry, I'm so proud of what you and your team have done. You didn't just create a product, you've built a movement. The world needs more companies like yours." Reading those words brought a wave of gratitude over Henry. They weren't just building a business. They were part of a much larger story, one that transcended the struggles and decisions of the business world. Their product was a tool, but it was also a catalyst for change. He looked at his team, who had gathered for their regular meeting, and smiled. The road had been long, and there were still many obstacles ahead, but they were ready for whatever came next. The mission was clear. They weren't just making a product, they were creating a better future. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Henry sat at his desk, the weight of the future pressing down on him. The team had made huge strides in their mission to bring clean water to the world, and their purifier was changing lives across the globe. But as they expanded further, the challenges grew more complex, especially when it came to balancing innovation with sustainability. Sustainability had always been at the heart of their mission, but as they scaled up production to meet the growing demand, Henry and his team realized that true sustainability wasn't just about making a product that helped people. It was about making a product that wouldn't cost the earth. The world was changing, and the pressure to keep up was mounting. Corporations, governments, and even some of their partners were pushing for faster, cheaper, and more scalable solutions. But Henry knew they couldn't afford to lose sight of their core values: integrity, environmental responsibility, and social impact. As the company entered its third year, they had to confront a series of hard choices. Choices that would either fortify their mission or undermine everything they had worked for. The company was at a critical juncture. Their product had taken off in several regions, especially in places like Africa and Southeast Asia, where access to clean water was still a daily struggle. However, as the demand for their purifiers surged, so did the pressure to scale quickly. One of their major investors, a venture capital firm, was pushing for more aggressive growth. They wanted to expand into even more countries, particularly in South America and Eastern Europe. The investor argued that now was the time to maximize profits, increase market share, and become a global leader in the clean water industry. But Henry wasn't sure if that was the right path. The company's values of sustainability and social impact were being challenged by the financial realities of global expansion. Henry, if we don't grow fast enough, we'll lose the market to competitors. The world needs our product, and we can't wait around for a perfect solution, his lead investor, Dave, argued during a tense phone call. I get it, Dave, Henry responded, running his hand through his hair. But if we scale too quickly and cut corners, whether on sustainability, labor practices, or the environment, we're no better than the companies that are polluting the very communities we're trying to help. Henry knew the stakes were higher now. As they scaled, they had to make careful choices about how they sourced materials, produced the units, and managed their environmental footprint. There were faster, cheaper ways to produce the purifier, but those options could hurt the planet in the long run. Sophia had been working tirelessly with their suppliers to source sustainable materials for the purifier. The initial design had used materials that were effective and affordable, but as they ramped up production, Sophia realized that they were increasingly dependent on non-renewable resources, particularly rare earth metals used in the solar panels. This was a massive dilemma. While the materials were cheap and effective, they had a severe environmental impact. Extracting rare earth metals was not only harmful to the environment, but it also fueled human rights violations in certain regions. The question was, could they continue to use these materials and meet the demand, or did they need to find a more sustainable, albeit more expensive, alternative? Sophia brought the issue up at their weekly meeting. I've been looking into alternatives, she said, and while there are more sustainable materials out there, they're significantly more expensive and the production timelines are longer. Switching to these could delay our shipments, increase the cost of production, and potentially make the product less accessible to the people who need it most. Henry frowned, considering the implications. On one hand, they had built a business that was now reaching millions of people. On the other hand, they couldn't ignore the reality that true sustainability meant sourcing materials that didn't harm the planet or exploit vulnerable communities. This is our biggest challenge yet, Henry said. We can't ignore the environmental impact of our product. But if we increase prices, we might lose the very people who need it most. It feels like we're trapped between doing the right thing and meeting demand. Maya, who had been quiet until then, spoke up. Maybe it's time we get creative. What if we partner with recycling programs to source materials from old solar panels or tech waste? There's got to be a way we can build this product without completely relying on virgin materials. We could even use it as a selling point. This purifier is made from recycled components, and it's helping clean the environment. It would appeal to both our sustainability-driven customers and investors. It was an interesting idea. Upcycling and circular economy principles had become more popular in recent years, and it was worth exploring. The team decided to dig deeper into this possibility. While they worked on finding more sustainable materials, Henry couldn't help but wonder if they were innovating fast enough. The company had already created a revolutionary product, but the world was moving quickly, and other companies were entering the clean water space, bringing new technologies to the table. Henry had heard about cutting-edge water purification technologies, nanotechnology that could purify water without the need for solar panels, or portable filtration systems that worked with minimal energy. While these innovations were fascinating, they came with their own challenges. First, these technologies weren't proven at scale. They had the potential to disrupt the market, but they also had the potential to fail. Second, developing and integrating these technologies into their existing product would be expensive, and Henry was already facing tight margins. Was it worth the risk? The team had several brainstorming sessions to discuss the possibilities. Should they double down on their current product, improving efficiency and scaling it? Or should they invest heavily in research and development to create something entirely new? Lucas, who had always been the visionary when it came to tech, was adamant that they should continue innovating. We've got something special, but we can't rest on our laurels. If we want to change the world, we need to think bigger. We need to push the boundaries of what's possible. Henry nodded, but couldn't shake the nagging thought that this might be a dangerous path. They were a young company, and adding complexity could jeopardize everything they had built. They would need to tread carefully. The ethical questions continued to weigh on Henry's mind. What did it really mean to be sustainable? Was it enough to produce a product that worked, or did they have a responsibility to consider the full life cycle of the product, from materials to end-of-life disposal? The world was demanding solutions, but at the same time, the world was facing environmental challenges that couldn't be ignored. Henry and his team couldn't afford to make compromises now. They had to find a way to balance innovation with sustainability, a challenge that would define their company's future. One evening, as Henry sat alone in the office, Maya joined him, holding 2 cups of coffee. She placed one in front of him. "Do you ever wonder if we're doing enough?" she asked. Henry looked out the window at the city skyline, deep in thought. "Every day," he said quietly, "but I think we're on the right track. It's going to be hard, maybe harder than we ever expected, but I know we can find a way to balance growth with responsibility. We just have to stay true to who we are." Maya smiled. "We'll find a way. We always do." Henry sat on the balcony of his office, overlooking the bustling city below. The world had never felt so big and so small at the same time. His company was growing fast, but as the reach of their work expanded, so did the weight of responsibility. Every decision they made now could have profound consequences, not just for their bottom line, but for the planet and its future. They had made the decision to stick with their values, but the question remained. Could they actually change the world? Could they build a global movement without compromising their ideals? Henry knew that their work wasn't just about selling a product. It was about creating a wave of change that could inspire others to take action, too. But the more they expanded, the more complicated the journey became. As Henry's company gained traction in the clean water space, competition started to emerge. Some of the biggest players in the water filtration market, backed by major corporations, began eyeing their territory. These competitors had more money, more resources, and more connections. Some offered similar products at a lower price, while others promised to bring new technologies that could outperform Henry's purifiers. The pressure was mounting. As a small company, Henry knew they had to stay agile, innovative, and true to their mission, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. The global demand for clean water solutions was only growing, and with more companies entering the market, the focus was shifting to scaling at all costs, often with little regard for ethics. In one particularly nerve-wracking meeting, Dave, the venture capitalist who had been instrumental in their success, laid it out for Henry bluntly. "We need to move fast, Henry," Dave said, pacing around the conference room. "We've got competitors breathing down our necks. They've got deeper pockets, more resources, and they're willing to compromise on quality and sustainability to drive market share. We don't have that luxury. If we don't scale up quickly, we risk losing it all." Henry felt his stomach tighten. Scaling fast was a necessary evil if they were to survive, but at what cost? Was the pressure to grow so quickly worth the risk of losing the very thing that made their company special? Amid the rising competition, a new opportunity appeared on the horizon. Henry's team had been working for months on a potential partnership with an international coalition of non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and global aid groups, some of which had been following their work closely. These organizations had the infrastructure, reach, and influence to distribute their purifiers to some of the most underserved regions in the world, including areas in South America, Central Africa, and the Middle East. The partnership would be a game-changer. It promised to amplify their efforts on an unprecedented scale, allowing them to serve millions more people. But the deal came with its own set of challenges. Many of the NGOs had specific regulations and guidelines on how products should be distributed. They also required strict accountability measures to ensure the money was being spent wisely. But there was a catch. The NGOs wanted Henry's team to make some concessions. They would need to cut costs significantly, which meant using cheaper materials and simplifying the product design. The NGOs argued that if they made the purifier more affordable, they could reach more people. Henry understood the logic, but he wasn't willing to compromise the integrity of their product. The negotiation meetings were intense. Henry and his team spent hours in conference rooms, presenting data, listening to counter-arguments, and coming up with solutions. On one hand, the idea of scaling rapidly, Helping millions of people was undeniably appealing. But Henry couldn't shake the feeling that the NGOs were pushing them toward a race to the bottom, where cutting corners and watering down the quality of the product could undermine the very purpose they were trying to achieve. "Henry, we need to consider the bigger picture here," Maya said one evening as they sat around the table, papers and laptops spread out before them. "If we go forward with this deal, we'll be able to provide access to clean water to people who have never had it before. We're talking about millions of lives saved. The product might not be perfect, but it will be life-changing." Lucas, who had been quieter than usual, spoke up. "I get it, Maya, but we've always promised our customers that we won't sacrifice quality. We're making a difference because our purifiers are effective, durable, and sustainable. If we compromise that for the sake of numbers, we risk destroying everything we've worked for." Sophia, ever the pragmatic one, added, "What if we do both? What if we could create a tiered pricing model, a version of the purifier that's more affordable but still effective for these regions, while maintaining the premium version for markets that can afford it?" Henry thought about this for a moment. The idea of a dual model, one for underserved regions and one for wealthier markets, was intriguing. It would allow them to maintain their commitment to quality while still reaching millions of people who needed the product most. But it wouldn't be easy. The logistics alone would be complicated. There would need to be local manufacturing in the regions they wanted to serve, and they would have to find ways to reduce production costs without sacrificing performance. The team knew that this was their golden opportunity, but it also felt like a gamble. Could they innovate fast enough to meet the demand while staying true to their values? As the days passed, Henry found himself walking through the streets of the city, deep in thought. He had spent so much time focused on the mechanics of scaling the company, on logistics, partnerships, and negotiations, that he hadn't paused to reflect on the bigger picture. What was their legacy going to be? Was this about building a company, or was it about building a movement? A movement that would challenge the status quo, that would prove that it was possible to make business and ethics work hand in hand? The idea of legacy had always been something that Henry pushed to the back of his mind. He had never really considered what kind of impact he would leave behind. Until now, it wasn't just about the money or the recognition. It was about making a meaningful difference. He thought of all the people they had already helped, the communities in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. He thought of the children who would now be able to drink clean water every day, the families that no longer had to walk miles just to fetch water, the people who were seeing hope for the first time in their lives. It was more than just a product. It was a movement. And Henry knew that if they were going to succeed, they needed to stay true to that purpose, no matter how tempting it was to take shortcuts or compromise on their values. Henry leaned against the desk, looking out of the office window. The city below seemed to pulse with energy, people rushing by, the hum of the subway in the distance, the glow of neon lights illuminating the streets. It was a thriving metropolis, a symbol of everything his company could one day become: powerful, influential, unstoppable. But today, the view from his window felt different. It was like everything he had worked for, the partnerships, the products, the people they had helped, was suddenly overshadowed by a deep, gnawing uncertainty. The decision was looming. Should they scale globally and potentially lose control over their values, or should they hold their ground and risk remaining a small company, one that might never achieve the massive impact they dreamed of? The negotiations with the NGOs had been intense, and as they wrapped up the deal, Henry felt uneasy. They had reached an agreement, one that would allow them to supply millions of affordable water purifiers to the poorest regions of the world. But in the process, they had had to make some significant compromises. The NGOs had insisted on a lower price point, which meant cutting back on the premium materials that had made their purifiers so effective. They also pushed for a faster, cheaper manufacturing process, which would reduce the lifespan of the products. And to make matters worse, the NGOs had requested that they focus only on distribution, leaving out any local production in the target regions, which had been Henry's initial plan to create jobs and stimulate local economies. The pressure had been immense. Henry had always believed that they could build a business that was both financially successful and socially responsible. But now, he was beginning to wonder if that ideal was unrealistic. The compromises didn't sit well with the team either. Maya, always the optimist, had pushed for the deal from the start. She saw the opportunity to provide clean water to millions of people who needed it most. But even she couldn't ignore the growing concerns about the product's long-term viability in these new markets. "We're making a difference, Henry," she reminded him, after a tense team meeting. "We've always said that our mission is to help people. We've got to trust that we'll figure out the rest as we go." Henry wanted to believe that. But as he looked at the reports showing how much they were cutting corners in terms of product quality and production speed, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were losing something in the process. They were compromising their core values. The next morning, Sophia walked into Henry's office with a stack of papers. She was their lead engineer and one of the most passionate people on the team, and it was clear she was struggling with the decision. "We've got a major problem," she said, placing the papers on the desk. "The lower-cost model might be cheaper, but it's not durable enough. In the long term, the product could fail in the field. We've already seen this happen with similar models from competitors. If it breaks, people won't be able to afford replacements, and we'll lose our credibility in those markets." Henry looked at the papers in front of him. They were detailed reports on the wear and tear of various water purifiers in real-world conditions, and the evidence was undeniable. Sophia continued, "This isn't just about profit margins. We're talking about people's lives here. If our product fails, we're not just losing business, we're losing trust. That's not something we can afford." Henry felt a weight in his chest. This wasn't just about numbers anymore. Trust was everything. Without it, they were nothing. But at the same time, he knew they had a moral responsibility to deliver on their promises. Millions of people were depending on them. They couldn't afford to turn back now. As they moved forward with the deal, the pressure to deliver on their promises mounted. Local governments and aid organizations were watching closely, and the success of the project would determine whether they could scale to other regions. In the midst of the chaos, Lucas, the team's CTO, called an urgent meeting. "I've been thinking about our options," Lucas said, his voice unusually tense. "We've made a deal, but the more I think about it, the more I wonder if we're taking the right risks. These compromises we've made on quality, they could come back to haunt us. If people start getting sick from defective purifiers, it's game over." Henry knew Lucas was right, but the weight of their global responsibility was also pressing on him. They couldn't walk away from the opportunity, not when it meant they could change the lives of so many people. "We don't have a choice, Lucas," Henry said, his voice firm. "We've committed to this, and we can't back out now. We'll find a way to fix the issues along the way. We'll innovate as we go." But deep down, Henry wasn't so sure. Was he sacrificing the company's long-term vision for the sake of short-term impact? Or was this the only path to creating the global movement they had dreamed of? One late night, after everyone had left the office, Henry sat alone in the dark, scrolling through old emails and photos from when the company had first started. He thought about the early days, the small team, the late nights working on prototypes, the vision of creating a product that could truly change the world. They had come so far, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. He had always imagined their company not just as a business but as a movement, a model for how innovation and responsibility could go hand in hand. Suddenly, he had a moment of clarity. He couldn't sacrifice the integrity of the product to save money. He couldn't stand by while cutting corners on quality just for the sake of expanding quickly. This is it, Henry. This is where you make the decision. It wasn't just about growing the company. It was about growing it the right way. Slowly, methodically, and ethically. They had a responsibility to their customers, to the people who trusted their brand, and to the planet they were trying to protect. The next morning, Henry called an emergency meeting with his leadership team. His decision was clear now. "I've been thinking about what we're doing, and I've come to a conclusion," Henry began, his voice steady. "We're going to pause the global expansion, at least temporarily. We're going to focus on fixing the product. We'll spend the next few months working on improving the quality of the cheaper model so that it doesn't break down in the field. We're not going to compromise on durability." The room fell silent. "But Henry," Maya started, "we'll lose time. The opportunity could slip away. The competition—" "I don't care about the competition," Henry interrupted, his voice sharp. "We're not in this for the short-term gains. We're in this to create something that lasts. Something that changes the world, not just for today, but for the future." The weeks that followed the decision were some of the most challenging for Henry and his team. They had made a bold commitment to prioritize quality over speed, but with that decision came an overwhelming wave of pressure. Every moment seemed to be filled with tension, anxiety about falling behind, fear of losing the momentum they had worked so hard to build, and a constant questioning of whether they were making the right move. The decision to pause the global expansion and focus on improving the cheaper version of the purifier was not one Henry made lightly. It required a complete rethink of their strategy, a return to the drawing board, and, most importantly, more resources than they had anticipated. It meant rethinking their production process, sourcing new materials, and re-engineering the purifier to meet their new standards for durability. Sophia and Lucas led the charge on the engineering front. They were working day and night, testing prototypes and evaluating each material they used. But every breakthrough felt like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. "We're getting closer," Lucas said one night, as they pored over the latest test results. "But this new design is more expensive to produce than we anticipated. If we don't cut costs somewhere else, we'll lose the price point we promised the NGOs." Sophia frowned. "We can't cut corners. Not again. If we lose our credibility in these regions, we might as well shut down." Henry stood at the window, staring out into the distance. The weight of the decision pressed on him. On one hand, they were ensuring that the product would live up to their standards. On the other, the clock was ticking. They had promised to deliver clean water to millions of people, and they couldn't afford to fail. It wasn't just about engineering the perfect product. It was about finding a balance between sustainability, affordability, and quality. A balance that didn't compromise their mission, but also didn't keep them locked in a constant cycle of improvement. Meanwhile, the competition didn't pause for Henry's team to catch up. As they worked on improving their design, new players entered the market, offering cheaper and faster alternatives to their purifiers. Some of these companies were using low-cost labor and substandard materials to drive down prices, while others relied on mass production to achieve economies of scale. One competitor in particular, a startup backed by a global tech giant, started gaining traction with their highly marketed, budget-friendly purifier. They promised rapid delivery, large-scale distribution, and an easy-to-use design that would fit into almost any home. They flooded social media, showcasing glowing customer reviews and endorsements from major influencers. The pressure mounted. Henry knew that this was their moment of truth. Could they continue to compete against this new wave of competition while staying true to their values? Or would they be forced to join the race to the bottom? "We can't ignore the market trends," Maya pointed out during a meeting with the leadership team. "This new competitor is reaching customers at a scale we can't even touch right now. We need to get creative fast." "We don't need to copy them," Henry responded, his voice firm. "We need to differentiate ourselves even more. We have the product people trust. Now we need to make sure everyone knows why that trust matters." But it wasn't going to be easy. The pressure to scale up quickly, to match the competition in terms of price and speed, was almost overwhelming. And for the first time in their journey, Henry questioned if they had the right balance of resources, time, and energy to fight this battle and win. It was during a particularly exhausting week that Henry experienced a moment of doubt, a rare, almost crippling moment. They had just received another round of test results for the new design, and things weren't looking good. The product had passed basic durability tests, but the cost to produce it at scale was simply too high. If they wanted to stick to their original commitment, they would have to increase the price, which would put them out of reach for the very people they were trying to help. Sophia had presented the numbers in the meeting. "We've made the product better, but it's now more expensive to manufacture. We can either raise the price and go after the higher-end markets, or we can scale back on features and go with the cheaper option. But I don't think the cheap option is sustainable. We'll face backlash." Henry sat back, feeling the weight of the decision settle in his chest. This wasn't just a business decision. It was a moral one. What if they couldn't deliver the purifier at the price point the NGOs needed? What if they lost their global partnerships and fell back into obscurity? Later that evening, Maya approached Henry in his office. She could see the exhaustion on his face, the familiar burden of leadership. The tension between growth and integrity had taken a toll on him. "You're holding your breath, aren't you?" Maya said gently, taking a seat across from him. Henry nodded, his gaze distant. "I don't know if we can do this anymore, Maya. I don't know if we can compete at the scale we want without sacrificing everything we've worked for. Maybe I was naive to think we could change the world and make a profit. Maybe we're just too small to make a real difference." Maya shook her head. "Henry, you're not alone in this. We're all in it together. But I think you need to ask yourself one thing. What kind of legacy do you want to leave?" Henry stared at her, taken aback. "What do you mean?" "I mean, why did we start this company? Why did we choose to take this path? It wasn't just about building a product or making money. It was about making the world better, about giving people a chance. That hasn't changed. The challenges are hard, but we've always faced them head-on. We've never backed down from a fight, and we're not going to start now." Maya's words echoed in Henry's mind long after she left his office. It was true. The mission had always been about more than just profit. It had been about creating real change. They were facing the biggest challenge yet, but the dream was still alive. By the end of the week, Henry called a meeting with the entire team. It was time to make a bold move, a decision that would redefine the company's path. "I've been thinking about everything," Henry began, his voice steady. "We're not just a company. We're a movement. And movements don't get built overnight. They take time, they take sacrifices, and they require people who believe in something bigger than themselves." He paused, letting the words sink in. "We've always promised to provide lasting solutions, not just quick fixes. We're not going to change our mission. We're going to continue focusing on delivering the highest quality product we can. And we'll do it slowly, carefully, and sustainably. We're going to find ways to scale at the right pace, one that stays true to our values." The weeks after Henry's decision to focus on quality over speed brought a newfound sense of purpose to the team. They were no longer caught in the rush to meet artificial deadlines. Instead, they were working with a clear vision, to build something sustainable, to stay true to their values while expanding the reach of their purifiers. Yet, no sooner had they resolved to embrace their mission than another test emerged from within their own ranks. It started with Maya. For months, she had been the optimistic driving force behind the project, always looking at the bright side and encouraging the team. But recently, something had shifted. Her usual energy was replaced with an underlying tension. Henry noticed it first during one of their weekly meetings. As Maya presented the team's progress on the new purifier design, her tone had been clipped, and her words seemed rushed. She seemed distracted, as if she were holding something back. "We've made some headway with the new material sourcing, but there are still logistical issues with the production timeline," Maya said, scanning through the slides. "We'll need more resources to meet the quality standards we set." Henry raised an eyebrow. "More resources? We've already stretched our budget thin, Maya. Are you saying we need to adjust our targets again?" She hesitated, a brief flash of frustration crossing her face. "No, I'm saying we can't afford to wait any longer. The competition is moving fast, Henry. If we keep dragging our feet, we'll lose our chance to lead this market. We need to make decisions quickly." There it was, the first crack in her unwavering belief that doing the right thing would eventually pay off. Maya had always been the one to support Henry's cautious approach, but now she was speaking as if the dream of global change had to be balanced with the reality of fast-paced business. Henry's stomach tightened. Was this the beginning of a divide in the team? That evening, Henry pulled Maya aside for a private conversation in his office. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "What's going on?" he asked gently. "You've been acting differently lately. I can feel the pressure building." Maya crossed her arms, clearly frustrated. "I'm under pressure, Henry. We all are. But I'm starting to wonder if we're really making the best decisions for the company. I know we've said we're committed to quality and sustainability, but how long can we hold on to that when the world is moving faster than we are?" Henry felt his chest tighten. "Are you saying we should change our approach? Compromise on what we promised?" "No," Maya replied, her voice softening. "I'm saying that we need to adapt. I've spent months working alongside you, and I've seen how much you've sacrificed to stick to our values. But what if it's holding us back? What if we need to scale up quickly to make a real difference?" Maya's words hung in the air. Henry knew she wasn't speaking from a place of malice. She was simply voicing the frustration that many of the team members were feeling. The competition was getting stronger, and their vision of gradual, Ethical growth was increasingly looking like a luxury in a world that demanded speed and scale. But Henry wasn't ready to abandon their mission. Not yet. We can't just change everything because it's hard, he said firmly. If we compromise now, then everything we've done up to this point will be meaningless. We can find a way to scale without losing who we are. Maya's expression softened, but there was still a trace of doubt in her eyes. I hope you're right, Henry. I really do. In the days that followed, Henry found himself questioning Maya's concerns. Were they holding on to something that was no longer practical? The internal divide was growing more apparent. While Henry, Sophia, and Lucas were firmly committed to their values, others on the team began to voice their doubts. Lucas, for example, had started pushing harder for new, more scalable manufacturing processes. We have to make it cheaper and faster to produce. Otherwise, we're going to miss the market completely, he argued during a team discussion. We've already pushed back the timeline for the third time this year, Sophia responded, looking weary. If we rush this, we'll jeopardize the product's reliability. I'm not saying we rush it, Lucas countered, but we need to accelerate. Our margins are thin, and the competitors are closing in fast. We need to figure out how to manufacture at scale while maintaining the core principles. Henry watched the exchange, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest. The team was fracturing. There was no easy way to solve this without compromising something important. The battle between speed and integrity had reached a boiling point. At the same time, the external pressure was mounting. The NGOs were calling for updates on the progress of the purifiers. They were eager to roll out the project on a global scale, especially in regions where clean water was most urgently needed. And the investors were starting to ask difficult questions. When will we see a return on our investment? Every call from the NGOs seemed more urgent than the last. We've got millions waiting for your product, Henry. You promised us clean water, and we need you to deliver, one representative said, her voice tinged with frustration. If you don't meet your deadlines, we'll have to go with other suppliers. We can't afford to wait any longer. Henry listened intently, his fingers gripping the edge of the desk. He understood their urgency. But who were they really trying to help here? The people in need? Or just their own timelines? The NGOs wanted results quickly, but at what cost? A few days later, Henry called an emergency leadership meeting. It was time to make the most important decision they'd faced so far. They could feel the tension rising, on both the internal and external fronts. The company had reached a crossroads, and there was no turning back. He stood at the head of the table, looking at his team. They were all exhausted, but their eyes were filled with determination. I've been thinking a lot about what Maya said, Henry began. The pressure to scale is real, and it's not going away. But we can't make decisions in fear of losing. We have to make decisions that will stay true to our vision. If we cut corners or rush this process, we'll lose everything we've worked for. There was silence in the room. But we're at a tipping point, Henry continued. We're being pulled in two directions, growth and integrity. I want to know, from all of you, if we're ready to take the next step forward, no matter the cost, or if we're going to stand our ground and continue building something that will last. The room was filled with silence as everyone looked at one another. Finally, Lucas spoke up. We need to keep moving forward, but I think we need to be smarter about it. We can scale, but we do it with a better plan. We don't give up the mission, but we build the infrastructure we need to grow efficiently. Sophia nodded. I agree. We can't keep pushing back indefinitely, but we can create solutions that don't compromise on the product's integrity. We'll just have to be innovative. Henry took a deep breath. Innovation. That was the key. I'm in, he said finally, meeting the eyes of each of his team members. Let's find a way to do both. We'll innovate and scale responsibly. We'll change the world, but we'll do it our way. The decision to innovate while remaining true to their core mission was a turning point for Henry and his team. After weeks of tension, they had found a way forward, but the road was anything but smooth. As they began executing their new strategy, they soon realized that the real challenge wasn't just in scaling their product. It was about ensuring they could innovate responsibly and stay true to their commitment to the world's most underserved communities. In the days following their leadership meeting, the team dived into the hard work of restructuring their approach. Lucas, now energized by the challenge, began scouting new materials and technologies that could help them produce their purifier on a larger scale without sacrificing quality. "We're not just going to manufacture more of the same," Lucas declared during their first brainstorming session. "We're going to reimagine how this purifier can be built from the ground up." Sophia and Maya took charge of the technical side, searching for ways to make the manufacturing process more efficient and cost-effective while keeping environmental sustainability in mind. They researched green manufacturing practices, new filtration technologies, and potential partnerships with local producers that would allow them to reduce costs and improve the overall performance of the purifier. "The key is to integrate these innovations into the design without losing sight of our commitment to the end users," Sophia said, pointing to a whiteboard full of new ideas. "We want to scale responsibly and not rush things for the sake of speed." Henry knew they were on the right track, but a nagging question remained. Could they innovate quickly enough to compete with larger players in the market while maintaining their commitment to the quality and values that set them apart? Meanwhile, as the team worked on their innovations, the pressure from the NGOs continued to mount. The global community was counting on them to deliver a solution to the clean water crisis. The purifiers, if rolled out successfully, could help millions of people in some of the most impoverished regions on the planet. But with that promise came an ever-tightening timeline. A week later, Henry found himself on a conference call with several key NGO partners. He could hear the frustration in their voices as they expressed concern over the delay in the rollout. "We've been waiting for over a year now, Henry. How much longer do we have to wait for your team to get things right?" A senior representative from one of the larger NGOs asked bluntly, "You said you'd deliver by the end of the quarter. Can you still meet that deadline?" Henry felt his heart race. The familiar weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders. The temptation to compromise, to promise the NGO's results before he was ready, was there. But he knew that rushing the product would jeopardize everything. They had to be meticulous. "I understand your concerns," Henry said calmly, trying to sound confident despite the pressure. "We are committed to delivering the highest quality purifier we can. But we've decided to take the necessary time to ensure that the product we deliver meets not only the market demand, but also our ethical and quality standards. This means we may have to adjust the timeline slightly, but rest assured, we're moving forward." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, the representative spoke again, his tone softer but no less urgent. "I understand, Henry, but you need to know, there are other solutions in the pipeline. If you don't move faster, we might be forced to go in another direction." It was a sobering reality check. Henry wasn't naive enough to think their product's quality alone would guarantee success. But he also knew that compromising on their mission wasn't an option. The balance between urgency and integrity was harder than ever to strike. Just as Henry was grappling with the external pressures, an unexpected opportunity came knocking. A large tech company, Green Tech Innovations, known for its focus on clean energy and sustainable solutions, reached out to Henry's company. They had been following Henry's progress and were impressed by the team's commitment to improving lives through innovation. They offered a partnership, one that would involve integrating their advanced solar technology with Henry's purifiers, allowing them to be powered in off-grid locations using solar energy. "We've been watching your work," said the CEO of Green Tech, a woman named Sarah, during their first meeting. "We believe that by combining your purifier with our solar-powered systems, we can significantly reduce manufacturing costs while reaching even more remote locations. This could be a game-changer for the developing world." At first, Henry was skeptical. It sounded too good to be true. A partnership with a large tech company could provide the resources they needed to scale faster. But it also had the potential to force them into a more corporate-minded approach that might conflict with their core mission. "We're very focused on keeping control over our product and staying true to our values," Henry said carefully. "We're not looking to scale just for the sake of scaling. We want to make sure that any partnerships align with our goals for sustainability, ethics, and affordability." Sarah seemed to understand. "I respect that. We're on the same page. We're looking for a long-term impact, not just a quick profit. Let's explore how we can make this work." After several weeks of negotiation and careful consideration, Henry and his team decided to move forward with the partnership. Green Tech's solar technology would allow them to expand the reach of their purifiers into remote areas, further aligning with their mission of delivering clean water to communities in need. But they also insisted on maintaining control over the product design to ensure it stayed true to their vision. The fruits of their labor began to show. With GreenTech's support, Henry's team was able to rapidly expand the manufacturing process without sacrificing quality. They streamlined their production and found ways to reduce costs, all while adhering to their sustainability goals. The new purifier design, with integrated solar power, was easier to produce and more effective than ever before. The team had managed to scale up production without compromising their core values. It wasn't without challenges, of course. There were moments of doubt, times when Henry wondered if they had made the right choice in pursuing such an ambitious innovation. But each small success, whether it was securing a new partnership or hearing positive feedback from the field testers, confirmed that they were on the right path. As the end of the quarter approached, Henry found himself reflecting on everything the company had gone through. The sleepless nights, the internal conflicts, the pressure from external forces. It had all led to this moment. They were about to roll out a product that could truly change the world, a product that could save lives, improve health, and bring hope to communities that had long been overlooked. But Henry knew the journey was far from over. They had taken a bold step forward, but there were still many obstacles ahead. The competition was fierce, and the challenges of scaling up without losing sight of their core mission would only grow. But one thing was certain. Henry was more determined than ever to make their vision a reality. This wasn't just about selling a product. It was about changing the world, one purifier at a time. With the new purifier design now in the field, Henry and his team were eager to see the impact their work would have on the communities they were determined to serve. But as the product began to roll out to test markets across Africa and Southeast Asia, they quickly learned that no amount of planning or innovation could prepare them for the unpredictable challenges of real-world implementation. It all started when they received their first batch of feedback from the field. Sophia opened the email, her fingers trembling slightly as she scanned the report. The tone of the message was polite, but the content was troubling. The first batch of purifiers they sent to Kenya had encountered several issues, unexpected malfunctions in the filtration systems that rendered some units ineffective. "This is bad. Really bad," Sophia muttered as she read through the technical report. Henry rushed over to her desk. "What's going on?" Sophia's face was pale, her eyes wide with concern. "The new filter design we integrated with the solar panels is malfunctioning. Some of the units aren't filtering out all the contaminants. We're getting reports of people getting sick." Henry's heart sank. This was the nightmare scenario they had all feared. They had spent so much time perfecting the product, focusing on innovation and scalability, but now it seemed like all their hard work might be undone by a technical issue they hadn't foreseen. He swallowed hard. "How many units are affected?" Sophia ran her fingers through her hair, clearly stressed. "About 10% of the batch. We don't have exact numbers yet, but the reports we're getting are concerning." Henry paced back and forth. This couldn't be happening. They had worked so hard to build a product that would make a difference, and now it seemed like they might be on the verge of losing everything. He knew that the people in these communities were counting on them. If the news of malfunctioning purifiers spread, it could ruin their credibility and stall their progress. They couldn't afford a failure like this. Henry immediately called an emergency meeting with the leadership team. Maya, Lucas, and Sophia gathered around the conference table, all with worried expressions. "We need to act fast," Henry said, his voice steady despite the panic that roiled inside him. "If we don't fix this, the project could collapse. We need to find out exactly what went wrong and resolve it before the problem spreads." Maya looked at him, her brow furrowed. "But what's the cause of the issue? The design was supposed to work." "We don't know yet," Sophia said. "It's possible that the integration of the solar panel system with the filter was too complex. The purifier isn't drawing enough power in some areas, which is affecting the filtration system. Some of the filters are not functioning properly when they're in low-light conditions." Henry ran his hands through his hair. "So the purifier isn't working when people need it most?" Sophia nodded, her expression grim. "That's right. The solar-powered mechanism is supposed to work in low-light environments, but it seems that in some regions, the panels aren't charging enough to keep the filter running at full capacity." "Do we know how long this problem has been happening?" Lucas asked, looking at the data Sophia had pulled up. It started happening shortly after we deployed the batch in Kenya, Sophia said. We've had a few similar reports from Southeast Asia, but it's less widespread there. Henry rubbed his eyes. This was a devastating setback. They had been so confident that they could take the next step in scaling their product and expanding their reach, and now they were faced with an unexpected technical failure that could undermine everything. We need to fix this immediately, no excuses, Henry said. We have to get the teams in the field to stop distributing the affected units and issue a recall for those that haven't been deployed yet. The news of the recall sent shockwaves through the company. Henry and his team had to make some difficult decisions. Not only did they need to deal with the technical issue, but they also had to handle the logistical nightmare of recalling thousands of units already in circulation. In the weeks that followed, they worked around the clock to fix the problem. The engineers worked tirelessly to redesign the solar charging system, ensuring that it could function in the low-light conditions they hadn't anticipated. Meanwhile, Henry and the leadership team coordinated with the field teams to pull back the malfunctioning units and replace them with new, improved models. Despite the technical setback, Henry's team found a renewed sense of purpose. They knew that delivering a flawed product was not an option. They couldn't afford to make any more compromises in the name of speed. Their commitment to getting it right was more important than ever. The time for innovation had come to an end, and now the pressure was on to fix the issue and deliver the results they had promised to the NGOs. The stakeholders were growing restless, and Henry could feel the weight of their expectations on his shoulders. He was on another conference call with the NGOs, and the tone had shifted. The patience they had shown earlier was starting to wear thin. "We appreciate your efforts, Henry," said the representative from one of the larger NGOs. "But we've been waiting for a long time now. If you can't deliver a working product soon, we will have to look at alternative solutions." Henry's chest tightened. He had no room for error. If they failed again, it could be the end of everything they had worked for. The mission, the vision, the company, they could all go down in flames. "We're working around the clock to resolve this," Henry said, trying to sound as confident as possible. "I know we've let you down, but we're committed to getting this right. We just need a little more time. I promise you we'll fix this." The representative didn't respond immediately. Finally, she spoke, her voice firm but understanding. "We're counting on you, Henry. But if you can't deliver, we have no choice but to move on." As the call ended, Henry slumped back in his chair. Time was running out, and it felt as if the world was watching every move they made. That night, Henry found himself alone in his office, staring out the window. The city lights flickered below him, but his mind was far from the hustle and bustle of the world outside. For the first time in a long while, he found himself questioning everything. Was this really worth it? Had they gone too far in their efforts to scale? Were they too ambitious? But then he thought about the people in Kenya, in Southeast Asia, and in countless other communities waiting for their product to work. The dream was bigger than the setbacks. The mission was more important than the failures. He couldn't let them down now. They could fix this. The days after the recall were some of the hardest Henry had ever faced. The weight of the setback was crushing, but it was the pressure of the ticking clock that really gnawed at him. With every passing day, their margin for error grew smaller, and the global spotlight on their company became more intense. The new purifiers were being re-engineered, the recall logistics were in full swing, and there was an increasing number of stakeholders breathing down their necks. Yet, despite the mounting pressure, Henry felt that there was something more profound at stake now. The mission wasn't just about delivering a product. It was about staying true to their vision and overcoming every obstacle in their path. In the wake of the recall, the team had retreated to their innovation lab. It was a makeshift war room, filled with technical diagrams, prototypes, and piles of reports. Sophia and Lucas were working with the engineers on a redesigned filtration system, while Maya coordinated the logistics of retrieving the faulty purifiers from the field. "This has to work," Henry said, his voice low and tired. He was hunched over a desk, looking at the field reports, which had now started to show a significant decline in contamination. The feedback, though still mixed, was starting to point to some improvement in the new models that had been shipped out. Progress was happening, but it felt like they were only inching forward. "Maybe it's time to change our approach a bit," Maya said, looking up from her tablet, a serious expression on her face. "We've been focusing so much on the tech. But let's not forget about the human element, how people are actually using the purifiers in their day-to-day lives. Henry glanced up at her, surprised. What do you mean? We've been treating the product as if it's just a piece of technology, Maya explained. But these are people's lives we're talking about. They're not scientists. We have to make sure they can use the purifiers easily and that they can rely on them in the environments where they live. Henry felt a spark of inspiration. She was right. In their rush to innovate and scale quickly, they had overlooked one of the most important factors in creating sustainable change, the user experience. We've been so focused on the tech side, Henry said, standing up, but maybe we need to integrate more user education and support. And what if we think about making it more adaptable to the specific needs of each community? Sophia raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the idea. You mean, like custom solutions for different environments? Exactly, Henry said, pacing. We've been designing a one-size-fits-all model. But what if we tailored the purifier's functionality to different regions? What if we involve the communities more deeply in the process, training them to maintain the units and providing them with the tools to adapt the system to their needs? Maya smiled. You're talking about empowering people to be part of the solution, not just recipients of it. Yes, Henry said, the weight lifting slightly from his shoulders. That's the direction we need to take. Innovation isn't just about the tech. It's about the people who will use it. If we can make the purifier more personalized, more adaptable, then we can make a real, lasting difference. With this new direction in mind, Henry immediately called a team meeting. They began discussing ways to train local communities to take ownership of the purification system. They didn't want just customers. They wanted partners in the process. We'll set up local training centers, Lucas suggested, so people can learn how to troubleshoot the purifiers, replace filters, and repair solar panels. And we can provide manuals and video tutorials in the local languages. Sophia added, we should also think about how to build local supply chains for parts and materials. That way, people can get what they need without having to rely on imports. I love this, Henry said, but it's more than just tech support. We need to build a cultural bridge. These communities have lived with limited access to technology for so long, and we need to earn their trust. We can't just show up, drop off a product, and leave. We need to be present, involved. They agreed to pilot this new approach in one of the most remote regions, northern Kenya. The team would travel there to implement the new community-driven model. It was a risky move. They still had a limited number of working units in the field, and the NGOs were breathing down their necks, demanding results. But Henry felt a deep sense of clarity. This was the right direction. 2 weeks later, Henry and his team arrived in northern Kenya. The landscape was vast, arid, and stark, with little more than dirt roads and a few scattered huts. But despite the harsh conditions, the people here were warm and welcoming. The team set up their makeshift training hub in a community center and began working directly with the villagers. They started by explaining the technology behind the purifiers, making sure everyone understood how it worked. They showed the people how to assemble, operate, and maintain the systems. As they worked, something unexpected happened. The villagers took ownership of the product. They began asking questions about how it could be improved and offered suggestions on how to adapt it to the local environment. Henry and his team were amazed by the depth of insight the community had. It was clear that they had a level of knowledge and resourcefulness that no one had anticipated. One elder, named Juma, spoke up during one of the training sessions. This technology is good, he said, but you need to make it work for our climate, our conditions. We can teach you how to adapt it to the seasons, the dust, the wind. We know our land better than anyone. It was a humbling moment for Henry. The solution wasn't just about technology. It was about people. Juma's insights would prove invaluable in fine-tuning the design. As the team spent more time in the field, they realized just how much they had underestimated the power of trust. By involving the communities in the process, by listening to their needs, and by empowering them to be part of the solution, they had built a foundation of trust and partnership that went beyond anything Henry had expected. Back in the office, as they began incorporating the feedback and making adjustments to the purifiers, Henry felt a shift in the atmosphere. The team was energized in a way they hadn't been in months. They were no longer simply responding to external pressure. They were creating something authentic and meaningful. The challenge, however, wasn't over. The NGOs were still waiting for results, and the clock was ticking. The new batch of purifiers, now incorporating the community-driven feedback, needed to be deployed quickly and at scale. The team worked tirelessly for the next few weeks, finalizing the new purifier design with the adjustments they'd learned from the Kenyan community. The units were tested rigorously, and the results were promising. Then came the moment of truth. Henry and his team would have to deliver on the new product, and they had to do it quickly. "I know we've had our setbacks," Henry said, addressing the team in a final meeting before the launch. "But this is what it's all been leading up to. We've turned a crisis into an opportunity to redefine how we scale. And if we get this right, we'll have made a lasting impact, not just with the technology, but with the people who use it." They were ready. The road ahead was still uncertain, but Henry knew that they had changed the game. They weren't just pushing forward with technology, they were moving forward with the belief that empowerment and community engagement were at the core of real innovation. The new purifier design was finally ready. After weeks of collaboration with local communities, hundreds of hours in the innovation lab, and countless revisions, Henry and his team were poised to make the final push. They had already received significant feedback from their test region in northern Kenya, and now they needed to scale it. But scaling a product across multiple regions of the world, each with its own unique challenges, was no small task. The pressure was mounting. Investors, stakeholders, and NGOs all wanted results, and they wanted them fast. It began with the first batch of purifiers being sent to East Africa and Southeast Asia. These were the regions that had seen the most interest, and the team knew that a successful rollout here would prove the effectiveness of their new approach. The team was operating under extreme stress. Maya, who had been managing logistics, was coordinating with local NGOs to make sure that the purifiers were delivered to the right locations and that the communities had proper training and support. Lucas was still managing the engineering team to ensure the units met the high standards required for long-term reliability in harsh environments. "We're almost there," Lucas said, pacing the office. "But these next few weeks are critical. If we can't handle this smoothly, we'll lose credibility. And we can't afford another setback." Henry nodded, his eyes fixed on the map of their planned distribution network. "We have to make sure everything is in place. Every step matters now. We're not just trying to solve a problem for a few thousand people. We're solving it for millions." They were preparing for a bigger stage than they had ever imagined. As purifiers began reaching communities in Southeast Asia and East Africa, Henry and his team were quick to notice an important shift. The initial enthusiasm was quickly replaced by some unexpected challenges. "We didn't anticipate this," Maya admitted one day after a long call with local partners. "In some areas, there's a deep-rooted reluctance to embrace outside technology. People don't trust it. They're used to more traditional methods, and they're hesitant to rely on something they don't understand fully." Henry felt a pang of concern. It was one thing to have communities embrace their products in the pilot regions where they had direct involvement, but now they were dealing with an entirely different dynamic. The cultural hurdles were bigger than they had realized. "We can't just push the product into their hands and walk away," Henry said, pacing the conference room. "We need to build trust, not just through training, but through understanding. We have to make sure we're adapting to their realities, not just showing up with a one-size-fits-all solution." They decided to initiate more on-the-ground support. Local leaders were brought into the training process, not just as passive participants, but as active partners. They worked together to refine the deployment strategies, tweaking the designs to meet specific regional challenges. Juma, the elder from northern Kenya, became an important ambassador for their cause, helping bridge the gap between the company and communities in the Horn of Africa. He was the trusted voice that made people believe the technology wasn't something being imposed on them. It was something they could make their own. As the purifiers started to gain traction in the field, Henry received an unexpected blow. A logistical nightmare unfolded when they learned that some of the critical parts used in the purifiers, specifically the solar panels, were delayed in production. Due to disruptions in the global supply chain, they were facing months of delays. "This could sink us," Sophia said grimly as they sat around the conference table, looking over the supply chain reports. "We're sitting on thousands of units we can't deliver because the components are stuck in transit." Henry closed his eyes for a moment, taking in the weight of the situation. He had been through a lot with the team, But this was a moment that tested everything they had built. They had already navigated technical failures, cultural barriers, and local reluctance. But now, the issue was out of their hands. They needed creative solutions, and fast. There was no time to wait for the solar panel delay to clear. The NGOs were pushing for results. Communities were waiting. "We need to find alternate sources," Henry said, sitting up straighter. "We can't wait for the current suppliers to catch up. Let's find local suppliers, and let's look into ways to modify our design to work with available solar components." It was a daunting challenge, but one they couldn't afford to ignore. Lucas and Sophia quickly dove into negotiations with suppliers, while Maya began exploring alternative manufacturing routes for the solar panels. Back in the office, the stress was palpable. Henry found himself receiving daily calls from investors and stakeholders who were anxious to know what was happening. "We need updates, Henry. What's the status of the project?" "You're behind schedule," one of the investors said sharply during a video call. "I understand the concern," Henry replied, doing his best to maintain composure. "But I want to assure you that the delays are temporary. We are addressing supply chain issues and refining the product to meet local needs. The outcome will be worth the wait." The pressure was immense, and Henry could feel the weight of their expectations bearing down on him. The future of the company, the project, and the team all hinged on his ability to navigate these challenges. The clock was ticking, and they had to deliver, not just for themselves, but for the people whose lives depended on it. Weeks passed, and the team worked tirelessly to overcome the obstacles. Slowly, but surely, their solutions began to bear fruit. Local suppliers for the solar panels were identified and on board, and the alternative designs they implemented proved successful. In parallel, the team implemented a comprehensive outreach campaign that included educational content, local leader testimonials, and training modules. They had learned from their early mistakes. Building trust was not just about delivering technology, it was about becoming part of the community's journey. As Henry stood in front of the team one morning, looking over the latest batch of successful purifier installations in a remote village in Vietnam, he felt a surge of pride. The lessons they had learned from the setbacks, the struggles, and the unexpected challenges had transformed their product into something far more meaningful than just a machine. It had become a symbol of collaboration, empowerment, and resilience. One day, as Henry sat at his desk in the late afternoon, an email arrived with the subject line, "First results from Kenya, a success." He opened it quickly and read through the report. It was everything they had hoped for. The new purifiers were being embraced by the community, and the localized training efforts had helped the technology thrive in challenging conditions. People were no longer simply using the purifiers. They were actively maintaining and enhancing them, adapting the designs to meet their local needs. Henry sat back, taking a deep breath. He had never been more confident in their mission. They weren't just scaling a product, they were scaling a movement. The initial success in Kenya, Southeast Asia, and parts of East Africa had catapulted Henry's company into the international spotlight. They had solved the technical problems, adapted to local needs, and earned the trust of communities. The purifiers were now functioning better than ever, and communities were not just accepting the technology, they were thriving with it. But as the company prepared to scale, new challenges began to emerge, global ones. With growth came a whole new set of pressures, political hurdles, growing competition, regulatory battles, and the intense need for financial backing. It started with a conference call from Europe, where Henry's company was preparing to expand. "We're encountering issues with certification, Henry. The EU regulators are taking issue with some of the components in your purifiers," said Liam, their European compliance manager. "They're citing new environmental standards that the design doesn't meet." Henry listened carefully, his mind racing. The EU market had been a key target for them, and now this roadblock could stall their expansion plans. "What's the timeline for meeting these new regulations?" he asked, trying to remain calm. "We're looking at a few months at least, unless we make significant adjustments to the design," Liam replied. Henry rubbed his forehead. The European market had been one of their primary revenue sources. This regulatory challenge, along with the ever-growing competition from established players, could severely delay their progress. As if that wasn't enough, there were political challenges that began cropping up in regions where they were seeing the most success. In parts of sub-Saharan Africa, governments had started to impose tariffs on imported technologies, citing the need to protect local industries. This was a direct blow to their ability to keep the purifiers affordable. One afternoon, as Henry sat with Maya and Lucas in the conference room, he received another call, this time from Kenya. "Henry, I've got bad news," said Wanjiku, their local partner. "The government's been getting pressure from local businesses. They want to impose a new tax on foreign companies that are bringing in products like yours." Henry's heart sank. They had been working so hard to build relationships with local stakeholders, government officials, business leaders, and community leaders. But now it seemed like the system was turning against them. "They're putting the tax at 30%, Wanjiku continued. "It could make your product unaffordable for a lot of the families here." Henry's mind raced. He knew they couldn't afford to lose momentum. Losing this foothold in Kenya, after all the hard work they had done, was unthinkable. "We'll handle it," Henry said, trying to reassure Wanjiku. "We're in this for the long haul. Start working with the local teams on a public awareness campaign. We need to make sure the people know what this product means for their communities. We'll find a way to make it work." As if the political hurdles weren't enough, competition was now ramping up at an alarming rate. Established corporations that had previously dismissed the idea of water filtration in underserved regions were beginning to see the potential market. "Henry, we've got trouble," Lucas said one afternoon, as he walked into Henry's office, his face drawn with concern. "There's a major company coming into East Africa. They're releasing a new water purifier model next quarter, and it looks like they've adapted our exact model." Henry stared at Lucas. He had suspected something like this was coming. Big companies didn't like the idea of a smaller, scrappy startup challenging their market share. "I knew this day would come," Henry said quietly. "We're fighting for something bigger than just a product. We're building a movement. But we can't ignore the competition. We need to act fast." The pressure was becoming overwhelming. Not only did they have to deal with regulatory issues and political challenges, but now they had to outmaneuver their competitors while continuing to grow their presence in every corner of the world. And then came the financial crunch. While Henry had managed to secure some funding for the initial expansion, the rapid pace of growth and the setbacks they'd encountered had put a significant strain on the company's resources. The delays in the solar panel production, the costs associated with navigating local regulations, and the need to constantly improve the product meant they were burning through cash faster than anticipated. Henry found himself in a meeting with his CFO, Emma, who was looking at the company's balance sheet with a furrowed brow. "We're running low on funds, Henry. If we don't secure additional financing within the next 2 months, we might not be able to continue at this pace," Emma said, tapping her fingers nervously on the table. Henry felt his stomach tighten. The last thing he wanted was to put the company and the lives of millions of people at risk because of a financial bottleneck. "Do we have any leads?" Henry asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "There are some VCs we can approach," Emma said, "but we're going to have to convince them that we can overcome these challenges. And it won't be easy. The competition is fierce, and with the political and regulatory issues, it's going to be hard to sell them on the potential." As the financial and competitive pressure mounted, Henry realized that there was a way out, but it wasn't going to come through fighting the system. It wasn't about trying to beat the competition at their own game. Henry needed a new strategy, collaboration over competition. He called an emergency meeting with his leadership team to discuss his idea. "What if we reach out to these big companies? What if we partner with them?" Henry suggested, his voice filled with conviction. "We have a shared goal, improving access to clean water. Why not join forces instead of competing?" Sophia looked at him, surprised. "You're suggesting we team up with the giants in the industry?" "Think about it," Henry said. "They have resources we don't. They have global distribution, manufacturing capabilities, and capital. If we partner with them, we can accelerate our growth. We can leverage their infrastructure while still maintaining the community-driven model we've built." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "And what do we get in return?" "We get scale. We get access to markets we couldn't have reached on our own. And we can influence their approach. We'll bring the community focus that they're missing. We'll keep the human element alive." The team sat in silence for a moment. It was a radical shift, but Henry believed it was the only way to push forward. The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, calls, and emails as Henry reached out to some of the largest players in the water purification industry. He was blunt. He proposed that they collaborate, not compete. It wasn't an easy sell. Some companies were hesitant. Others were flat-out dismissive. But after a series of high-level negotiations and demonstrations of the impact their technology had already had in communities, the first breakthrough came. A major water purification company based in Europe, PureTech, agreed to a pilot partnership. They would help distribute Henry's purifier in exchange for sharing his community-driven approach and providing local engagement expertise. "We're willing to take a risk on this," said Eric, the head of partnerships at PureTech, after the deal was finalized. "If you can prove that your model works at scale, we're in." Henry felt a surge of relief. This partnership could be the game changer they needed. With PureTech's global presence and their community-first approach, they could now make meaningful impact on a scale that had once seemed impossible. With the partnership secured with PureTech, Henry and his team were cautiously optimistic. The collaboration promised to expand their reach into new territories, giving them access to resources they had never imagined. They were now able to tap into PureTech's global distribution network and manufacturing capabilities, resources they had sorely lacked until now. But with all the potential that came with this partnership, there was still a looming uncertainty. Could they truly scale their vision without losing what made their mission unique? The values of community, empowerment, and sustainability that had been their guiding principles from the start were at risk of being diluted as they moved toward corporate partnerships and global growth. Henry knew that the global stage was a double-edged sword. Expanding into new markets, especially with the backing of a large corporation, meant more scrutiny. They would be under a magnifying glass now. More eyes on them, more voices judging whether their technology was working, and more pressure to deliver quickly. The first major test came when the team rolled out the new purifiers in South America. The partnership with PureTech allowed them to bypass much of the red tape that had previously hindered their entry into these new markets, but the scale of the rollout came with unforeseen complications. In some regions, the local supply chains were insufficient to handle the rapid increase in demand. In others, cultural barriers reappeared, and the level of trust that had been carefully built in smaller regions was not as easily replicated on a continent-wide scale. "I thought we were past the growing pains," Maya said, her face grim after another round of calls with local teams in Brazil. "We've been dealing with stockouts. Some places are still not fully trained, and now the local competitors are getting in on the game. They're offering cheaper alternatives." Henry stood by the window of his office, looking out at the busy city below. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on him. His company was now operating in multiple continents. The stakes had never been higher, and the questions were getting tougher. Was their technology really improving lives, or were they just another corporate venture trying to capitalize on a global market opportunity? It was during a long flight back from Brazil that Henry had a quiet moment to reflect. The airplane's cabin was dim, and he couldn't help but replay the conversations from the last few months. Investors had begun to ask for clearer financial returns. PureTech was eager to see faster growth. Local governments were pushing for more immediate results, often at the expense of their ethical standards. He had always believed that scale should not come at the cost of values. The technology was only part of the equation. It was the human element, the relationship with the people they were serving, that made this whole mission worthwhile. But as their operations grew larger, those very relationships were becoming more difficult to maintain. Henry closed his eyes. He knew the decision he had to make. The team gathered for an all-hands meeting the following week. The pressure was on, but Henry knew the next step was crucial, not just for the company's financial future, but for its soul. "I've been thinking a lot about our next steps," Henry began, his voice steady as he stood in front of the team. "We've come a long way. But as we scale, we're at risk of losing the very thing that makes us different. We can't let that happen." He paused, looking around at the faces of the people who had been with him since the beginning. Maya, Lucas, Sophia, and the others were all watching him intently. "We need to double down on community. Local leadership needs to be at the forefront of everything we do," Henry continued. "It's not enough to just distribute our product. We need to ensure that each community we enter can shape how the technology fits into their lives." Maya nodded. "You're talking about decentralization, right?" Empowering local leaders to manage and maintain the systems. Exactly, Henry said. We've seen how much more successful the deployments are when we have local champions. We need to train local teams in every region we expand into, train them to not just run the technology, but to lead their communities. He turned to Lucas. This will require additional resources, both in terms of training and in tailoring our solutions to each community. I need you to work with the product team to ensure that we can scale these efforts efficiently. I'm on it, Lucas said, but I'll need more resources for local partnerships and new hires. And we need to be ready for potential backlash, Sophia added. Local competitors won't sit idly by as we expand. They'll try to undercut us on price, and we'll need to prove our value to the communities in a way that goes beyond just a low-cost alternative. Henry took a deep breath. I know, but we're not in this just to sell a product. We're in this to create lasting change. We've always said that our purifiers are just the start. It's about building sustainable systems, empowering people, and changing lives. Despite their renewed focus on community-centered growth, they knew they were now up against bigger challenges than ever. PureTech had its own objectives, and Henry was beginning to feel the tension between long-term impact and the short-term profits that their partners wanted to see. One day, during a meeting with PureTech's executives, Henry felt the strain as the conversation shifted towards scaling up and cutting costs. We're pleased with the progress so far, Henry, Eric from PureTech said, looking at the financial spreadsheets. But we need to see more aggressive numbers. We want to cut costs in production, streamline operations, and get these units into more markets. I understand the need for profitability, Henry replied, keeping his voice even, but we can't compromise on the core values that got us here. Cost-cutting cannot come at the expense of the communities we're trying to help. If we rush to meet targets and lose that connection, then we lose everything. Eric raised an eyebrow. I'm not saying we abandon the communities, but we do need to find efficiency. PureTech is looking at profitability too. I understand that, Henry said, but the model we've built relies on community leadership. If we cut corners on that front, we risk losing the very foundation that makes our work meaningful. The conversation became tense, and Henry could feel the divide widening. It was in the midst of these growing tensions, both internal and external, that Henry received a call from Juma, their local leader in northern Kenya. I wanted to let you know, Henry, Juma began, that the new purifier systems are having a huge impact. People are seeing the results: clean water, healthier families. And more than that, they are taking ownership of the project. We're already training the next generation of technicians. Juma's voice was filled with pride. This is something bigger than just technology. It's a movement. Hearing Juma's words, Henry realized something vital. No matter how tough things got, no matter how much pressure they faced to cut corners or focus only on financial growth, the impact was real. They weren't just distributing purifiers, they were empowering people. The message had been clear all along. Technology alone couldn't change the world, people could. It was a pivotal moment, and Henry knew exactly what he needed to do next. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?